Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are on our wonderful planet. And welcome to this week's live stream. This was a more impromptu live stream because we hadn't planned it too long. And also, if you have been connected to us and following this journey, I've been on the move quite a lot. We were in South Africa last week, and then in Saudi Arabia, and then in Qatar. And actually, this live stream was supposed to be from Riyadh, and we couldn't make it happen, so we had to reschedule. And it was meant to be live from Riyadh, but now it's live from London. Obviously, not as warm and sunny as Riyadh, but it is warm and sunny in London, strangely, but not as warm and sunny as Riyadh. So, massive thank you for those of you who joined the live stream or are joining the live stream this week. This is a multi-platform stream, so we go out on a few different platforms, but primarily our focus is the LinkedIn community. And again, a massive thank you. This is a very important topic. We're going to talk this week about how to keep great people. There you go. For those of you who were born in around the 80s, that will mean a lot, right? For those of you not, you're like, what is this? Well, as we say each week, we try and make the intros get a bit more flashy, a bit bigger. Thus is our commitment to create an awesome live stream on a regular basis for the LinkedIn community. Focus on the very best things that we find out from the greatest companies, the best managers, the best leaders all around the world. If you've not been connected to us, well, firstly, why not? But if you are here, then awesome that you're here. Our organization is called the World Class Manager Team. My name is Wayne Clark, and I'm the very lucky, the fortunate front man of the organization. And our focus has been on developing line manager capability for the last, well, God knows how many years. And we've been focused very much on looking at this globally, all the way from New Zealand, all the way through to Canada, and pretty much everywhere in between, looking at what great managers do. Our world-class manager course is based on the insights now of more than 50,000 managers in about 38 countries. And as I mentioned in the intro, I've been on the move for the last 10 days, 14 days or so around a few different countries. So here's a sort of a very simple, a very naive, a very simple observation based on the last week or so of moving around the place. And the observation is that it seems to be that no matter where you are, most people in most places, most of the time seem to have most of the same issues to deal with. And this was no more sort of stark than this sort of juxtaposition between these two stories that happened last week in close proximity, right? So one was, I was in Johannesburg talking with a political journalist, actually, who's been a journalist for the last 30 or so years. I mean, remarkable, truly remarkable man. And one of the things we were talking about was looking at this relationship between the petrol pump attendants, the people who put your petrol in when you go to the petrol station in Johannesburg. And we were looking at the link between the average one and the one who seems to make a lot of money in tips, because obviously they rely quite heavily on tips. And it's also quite a dangerous job and all the other things involved in this. And one of the things we looked at was, if you look at that, then we know that there was this key relationship between that individual and the person who owns the franchise or the forecourt manager or whoever it might be. There's a key relationship here at play between the individual and the line manager. And we know that you can get a culture of a station, and it has a huge impact on the behavior and how that individual feels working there, which of course has a huge impact on you as the customer. So the interface between you and the brand and the actual company, of course, isn't the company, but it's that petrol pump attendant. And if you have a great relationship with them, you probably see the organization quite favorable. And if not, then you might think it's bad service, therefore a bad brand and a bad organization. So we saw this sort of moment here in this quite difficult, physically intensive, low-paying environment in Johannesburg. A few days later, I'm in Riyadh, and we're talking to someone who is very senior and is presumably very, very well paid as well. And they were talking about the problem in performance management and the relationship between themselves and their line manager. So it was quite amazing, because you're looking at two very different individuals, two very different walks of life, in terms of the ratio between how much the highly paid person is and how much the sort of more lowly paid person is. I mean, it was a gulf apart in terms of the amount of money. But here we are with the same type of challenges. And this has been the very simple observation everywhere we've gone around the world, which is most people, most of the time, seem to have mostly the same challenges. One of these big challenges for the individual, for the manager, for the team, for the department, for the organization is, of course, about how do we retain talent? How do we keep our best people? How do we keep people in the organization? And I'd like to take a little bit of a walkthrough, a bit of a tour as part of this live stream of looking at some of the key things that we think are probably some of the most impactful things that you can do. And also, I would argue, they don't really necessarily need any investment at all. I don't think they need any money spent in these areas. There are things here which are cultural, there are behavioral things that we can change in the organization, which I think are worth looking at. And I'd like to back this up with some data. So we've got data now on about 15,500 managers, probably more, but the last time we looked, or I certainly looked, we've got data on around 15,500 managers who've been through our program. So I'd love to share with you some insights based on that data. As always, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So if you do have any questions, any thoughts, any things that you think work really well in your organization, and you just want to share, you've got a moment, you're having a moment of revelation and you want to share it with the world, please just let us know. We've also got someone live on the line. Ashley from our team is live on the line too. She can take some of the questions and feed them through as we're in the live stream. Or if you want to make them private, just flag them as private. And of course, we can deal with that privately in DMs perhaps later. So let's get started. And one of the things I wanted to, in a way, set up, actually two things, two key intents. I like to start these sessions with something of an intention, right? I've got two key intentions for today. One is around what I would call helping you to build a really robust business case for change. So I was thinking about this, right? So when you're trying to build a really robust business case for change, I was thinking, there are some quite famous acronyms out there, right? Like, the whiffing factor, what's in this for me? And then you've got I don't know, what else have we got? We've got SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound. Great set of acronyms, wonderful. And I was thinking, building a robust business case for change. This could be it, right? This could be the building robust business case for change. It's Burvakufaka. So next time you're in a meeting, you say, guys, I've got a revelation. I was on this live stream with Wayne and he came up with this acronym and it just really worked. It's Burvakufaka. Sorry, I'm an only child. I have to laugh at my own jokes. But Burvakufaka, here we go. Building robust business case for change. And all jokes aside, the point of why we like to share this stuff with you is often we're finding out, as I mentioned in the intro or double intros, of all the stuff that we're finding seems to be very similar all around the world. Most of the problems that we face are the same. Most of the solutions that we could use are usually the same as well. So just because it worked in Vietnam, it doesn't mean it's not going to work in Morocco or in Brazil or in Canada. It tends to be the same sorts of things. Of course, there is local flavor, there's cultural difference, there's religious, racial backgrounds, all the very different things that wonderfully differ us as human beings. But at the core of what we want from our work experience, from the employee experience, I would argue, certainly in the case of how we retain talent, most of this stuff seems to be the same. So my purpose here is to try and create as much as for you as possible as a really robust business case for change, things that you can take to your more senior leaders in the organization, or if you are a senior leader in the organization, perhaps things that you can use to convince some of your peers or some of the other key stakeholders across the organization too. So that's intent number one. And of course, intent number two is we're a commercial organization. We run the World-Class Manager Program. My intent is to convince you that this is so awesome and so valuable for your company that you would want to implement it. And of course, I'm biased. And of course, it's a plug because we believe it's awesome. We're absolute fans of what we built over the last 10 or so years. So the World-Class Manager Program is based on all of these insights. And again, everything we're sharing with you as part of these live streams is based on the data. And one other thing that you might want to check out for free is we created a series of videos in New York City last year around the launch of the book. We called it the New York Series, funnily enough. And it's based on the 12 principles of the World-Class Manager Program. It's all freely available. It's not going to cost you anything. You can use your phone and scan this QR code or just go to the website worldclassmanager.com and you can check out it says video showcase on one of the links. And you can check out the videos of actually Ashley, who's live on the line, set out 12 different locations in New York City and it was quite hot. So I was running around New York with a cameraman in a suit. Wasn't that fun, but it looks much, much more fun on camera anyway. There you go. So the World-Class Manager Program, bunch of stuff to look at. And as I said, what we want to do as much as possible is to build this sort of really robust business case for change. So you can use that in the next meeting. First thing I wanted to talk about, so I've got five key things, top five key things to focus on and to share with you in terms of some of the data here. One is looking at what we would call the role of the manager. So I think this is such a fundamentally important question to ask and to think through and think about where we are. We are on, what were we? This is it's May the 9th, 2024. Given all of the things that are constantly changing and shifting in our world, and we ask a very simple fundamental question: what's the role of the manager in the organization going forward? And it sounds like such a naive, simple question. And it's a question we like to ask CEOs and leadership team members, because if you think about it, given everything that's changing and shifting, and you ask this question, is the role of the manager right now what it needs to be in the future? Is the role of the manager right now what it needs to be in the future? The reason why this is such an important question to ask is because often what happens is the role of the manager evolves naturally, not because often there's been a strategic design of the role of the manager, but because the manager has to survive. Managers in general have to survive. If you think about the tremendous pressure on managers in terms of the workloads, the people challenges in their teams, as well as the other key stakeholder challenges in the organization, let alone the fact that I, as a very busy manager, are now expected or should be expected to become overnight some sort of DEI expert. I'm expected to become some sort of ESG expert. I'm expected to understand some of the challenges in coaching people in the team who might be trying to build a family in terms of fertility issues. True story, I was interviewed a few weeks ago on a fertility podcast, and it really made me think, because, you know, as people go through significant periods in their life where they're trying to talk with a manager about something, most managers are ill prepared to be able to talk about some of the things that the organization expects them magically, like some fairy descends and waves the magic wand of realization on managers. And therefore, like in the Matrix, like when the guy says, Neo, you know, I know Kung Fu, is like the wave the magic wand and say, I understand facility matters. I understand ESG. I understand you down with OPP. Yeah, you know me. I mean, this is insane. I'm making light of this, but this is the sort of expectation that the organization has on the manager community. So there's a tremendous amount of expectation on the manager. And how much are we helping managers to cope with some of this stuff? In most cases, in most places, in most countries, we're not, based on what we see, right? There's always a good intention. The HR team, the OD team, the L&D team, the CEO, the HR director, everyone has the right intent without a doubt. Often there are investments made, but it seems to still be that the managers, as far as we're concerned, based on what we see from the manager side of things, is still telling us that they need support. Now, this is a really compelling statistic when we think about this topic of how do we keep great people. And of course, remember, we have a tremendous bias because we're focusing here specifically on managers. And what we found in our research is 50% of managers say that they would like to leave the organization because they don't feel grown and developed. As we say in our data, 50% go because they don't grow. In our book, which we launched last year called How to Become a World-Class Manager, we talked about this in sort of at length. And it was also corroborated by a number of other studies and statistics and research pieces done looking at this same number. So if you look at the percentage of people who seem to leave the organization, managers, frontline staff, it's not exclusively for managers. It tends to be, based on experience, that about half the population who leave will cite career growth and development as the number one reason why they left the organization. So yes, people leave managers, we know that, but why do they leave? It's not because often the manager is a real terrible person. It can be the case. It's more because there are other factors at play. And it is one of those really big factors is the extent to which I feel grown, developed, and invested in. So if we are focused on keeping great people, then this first statistic kind of solves much of the challenge, right? Because it forces us to rethink, how do we help to grow and develop the manager population in the organization? I mean, we might need to get into this in depth, deeper in a future live stream, because I think just this one question, this one topic alone warrants a whole sort of series of debate on this, because I think this is such a hugely important area. So about 50% of managers will leave the organization because they don't feel grown and developed. So again, helping you to build this robust business case for change, the Burr-Kurt. If we're going to build this robust business case for change, then surely one of the things that we must think about is, how do we take this entire management population? If you are the CEO, how do you get your arms around this manager population? And it doesn't matter whether you're geographically dispersed, because we see this all the time. This should be no impediment or impingement, or if that's the word, to develop the manager community in terms of developing their collective capability. Big words on the live stream from London. You know, this is such an important area. So how do we focus on that? And this should give us quite a key data point to discuss, certainly amongst leadership teams, of how do we do that? How do we get our arms around the manager population and develop their collective capability, right? Key question to ask. So 50% leave. So again, in building this robust business case for change, I think this is really something to debate here. The second big one, when we look at goal setting, so we found from our research that 42% of managers in the organization do not know what the goal of the organization is. Say it again. 42% of managers, based on our research, do not know what the goal of the organization is.
What you talking about? What you talking about? What you talking about, Willis?
You're right, Arnold. I mean, this is insane, isn't it? 42% of managers do not know what the goal of the organization is. So imagine you are the CEO, you've done a great job, you've put together the strategy and the plan, you've got all of your managers together, and you've shared with them, as happens quite often, right, in terms of a roadshow, some sort of CEO forum, exco session, XCOM, SLT, whatever you call the leadership team, will get together with manager populations, whether that's virtually or face to face, share with them in terms of what the goal and the strategy is, think they've done a great job of it. We come along a few months afterwards and we poll those managers, because this is what we do all the time. And about 42% of the manager population, and this is, I think, best case situation, and even 42%, I don't know if that's true, but 42%, according to what we found, would say that they don't understand what the goal of the organization is. Now, that might not be important. You might think, well, so what? But think about this in the context of why we're here in this live stream talking about this key topic, right? Key topic, of course, is keeping great people. Now, I don't know about you, but most human beings' brains don't cope very well with ambiguity. So when we've got half of the manager population who probably don't understand what the goal of the organization is, then how can I possibly link my individual effort, my goals, my plans to something that we're trying to do as an organization? It's kind of impossible when I don't understand it. What happens when you don't understand it is, again, because the brain doesn't seem to cope very well with not knowing stuff, it makes stuff up. So what you end up happening if you are a CEO or a CFO or someone in a senior position is you've got a huge population of your manager community misfiring effort in all sorts of directions. Of course, the job, we would argue, of a great CEO is to drive that alignment and to ensure that the collective effort of the team is geared towards shooting towards a particular direction. What we find here is about half of the managers, roughly, have no clue what the goal of the organization is. And that's a problem for the manager community. Imagine now if you sort of dip below that into a broader population of people who report to the manager community. They've got no chance of understanding what the goal of the organization is. And what it also does is it tremendously disempowers a manager. Like, in a way, like, why would you, what's the point of you? If you're the manager, if I'm in your team, I'm the most junior person in the company, then why are you a manager? We know exactly the same amount of information. You're not any sort of more clued into what we're trying to achieve than I am. So really, and I'm also better at the day job. So really, what's this all about? So I think this is tremendously disempowering for managers, and we can do a better job. I don't think it's about investing more money. It's definitely about investing more time and effort to help upskill and build the capability of the manager community. But I think this is a really big one. So again, in the context of losing people and people leaving the organization, it's quite easy to see why, given that first statistic, 50% of the population would say that I leave because there is a lack of growth and development opportunities. There is never, and I don't care whether you've got a company of 5 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people, it tends to be there can never be a limited amount of opportunities to learn and grow. But this is what people say based on what we found. So again, looking at this the other way, first point, remember, was about how do we make sure that people do feel grown and developed? And that's something important to focus on. Second one is, can we help the managers to better understand what the goal of the organization is? I think this would have a huge impact in terms of my desire to want to stay and be further emotionally connected and engaged with the organization. Number 3 is looking at what we would call the appraisal conversation. And this was fascinating also because, according to what we found, 61% of managers understand the preferences of the individuals in their teams. Now, again, this is a self-reporting statistic. Now, how many of would the 61% all been completely truthful? We hope they would have been. But I suspect, like most people, if you look at most levels in an organization, most people think they do a better job of management than their team think they do, right? So when we take the middle manager population of an organization and say, how good are you in terms of management? They'll say, I'm good. I'm pretty good. I'm that guy. I'm a hotshot. People love me. I'm empathic. Team know that I've got them in my heart. I've got their back, right? And then you talk to the team and say, "What do you reckon of the line manager?" "Oh, I don't know. Not very good." So you often see these difference of opinion, but it seems to be that people will overrate mostly their abilities, but which is totally natural. But 61% say that they understand the preferences. If this is correct and this number is right, then it means that we've got about 40%, of course, of the manager population who don't understand the preferences of the individuals in the team. Flip that the other way. If you look at the manager population, their senior managers or the directors or the leaders that they report to, pretty much I would say it's the same. About half the population do not understand the preferences of the line managers who report to them as well. So again, when it comes to these really important moments, like if you think of the moment of truth, if you look at a week in the life of you or someone in your team at work, much of what happens in a week is quite formulaic. And actually, there are a few set play pieces. which you can improve, which have a disproportionate impact on the experience of being at work day in, day out. So let's think about it. You come into work on a Monday, your manager greets you and asks you how the weekend was. Say it's very good, thank you very much. You might have a little talk about it. There could be some sort of team briefing. There could be a regular team catch-up update. There might be something where the manager needs to translate this strategic vision, mission, set of goals, strategic objectives into something relevant for the team, maybe as one part of the week. There might be some feedback from another part of the organization or from customers that you want to get through the team, and on and on and on it goes. And to the point where at the end of the week on a Friday, if you work Monday to Friday, there might be something about helping you to have a great weekend, talk about that and set up maybe what the challenge is for next week, right? So a week in the life of, for many people in organizations, is in a way, there's a series of set pieces which can be improved. Now, if you think about this, if you end up at the end of the week and some of those set play pieces aren't present or the quality of them is really poor, then it probably means you'd say you've had a pretty lousy week at work. So you look at it the other way around. And we had a manager, 100% true story. On a Monday morning, I said to him, it would be a really good idea to ask your team when they come in on a Monday morning how their weekend was. And he said, oh, that's a really great point. And he started to write it down. And as he's writing it down, I'm looking at him thinking, that's not a great point. Why are you writing down? And I thought, wow. But then, of course, I had to check myself. You know, to some people, some of these things are so natural, aren't they? And to some people, they're like a revelation. He'd never considered to ask his team how their weekend was, not because he's not a nice person, but it's just not him. So again, there are things that we might not be doing that we can learn that will, of course, make a dramatic change to how it feels for many other people in the team to be at work. The appraisal conversation is one of those key moments of truth. And you think about every single time, I pretty much guarantee this, every single time you've ever left an appraisal conversation, if you think back into your career history, I guarantee you've left with an emotion every single time. It could be that you leave feeling happy, sad, judged, valued, undervalued, all sorts of a range of emotions. And you know, we know that the appraisal conversation is so fundamentally important. So a quick expose here, and I think this is for good reason. So I got to go and spend a few days last week in Cape Town launching our book called How to Become a World-Class Manager. It's a tremendous read. And we launched it in Cape Town at the 12 Apostles Hotel, which is a hotel owned by the Red Carnation Hotel Collection. For anyone who knows me or is connected to us, you'll know that I talk about them a lot, purely because they are the embodiment of exceptional employee engagement. They get exceptional customer feedback, and they've got a sustainable, profitable, growing, exceptional, successful organization in terms of commercials. So if you look at the dream, like the sort of Sears profit chain, as it was called, of looking at the relationship between engagement, customer satisfaction, and commercial performance, I mean, it really ticks every single box. And I got to spend 3 days there as part of the launch for the book last week. One of the fascinating things that I've sort of understood and studied in depth is looking at the appraisal conversations they have, and not to expose too much about them because this is, I guess, private and potentially competitive advantage stuff. But there is the way that they go about doing what they do is absolutely brilliant. And the point of it, as far as I've learned as an outsider, is to make sure that everyone feels fundamentally cared for. So, it's impossible that you can turn not feeling cared for into an emotion of ensuring that the guest feels cared for, right? And ensuring that the guest feels cared for is not just about being soft and fluffy and being really cute and nice. This is, of course, that you want every single guest, when they check out of your hotel, to tell everyone that they know and everyone that they don't know on a public forum like TripAdvisor that they should go and stay there. Equate that to our own organizations. If you think about what level of emotion, what type of emotion do we leave these one-to-ones and these appraisals with, has a huge impact and dictates the behavior on a moment by moment basis. We call that culture, if you think about it. And then it results in the exact interaction or the quality of interaction that the customer gets. So it's no surprise that an organization like Red Carnation, and we've come across a few organizations similar, managed to translate that feeling, that interaction in a great appraisal one-to-one into what the end result is, which is what the customer says about the organization. So it's no surprise that it's a sustainable, profitable, growing enterprise, because it delivers, the sort of knocks the socks off customers all the time in terms of how they feel about service delivery. And why is that? Well, it's that way because they've got employees and members of the team who feel fundamentally cared for. Why is that the case? Well, because the manager ensures that in the one-to-one, I leave the one-to-one feeling an emotion of feeling cared for. Why? Because they're asking the right questions and they're actually good enough to be able to listen to what the responses are. So, not to be on my soapbox about this, but I think the appraisal part here, when it comes to this big context piece of how do we keep great people, is often the part where we win or lose. This is where the battle is won. This is where the lines are drawn, right? This is it. This is serious stuff, because if we do a bad job of this, then we know exactly how we leave feeling. If we do a great job of this, we know exactly how we leave feeling. This is something which doesn't need to cost any money at all. This is more about how do we help every single person who has a one-to-one build their collective strength, their individual strength and ability to have a really great one-to-one. I'm worked up. I'm fired up now. I'm fired up. Right. So this is number 3 when we talk about the appraisal conversations. A big one, dwelled on it for a little while, but I think it's tremendously important. Number 4 is where we look at what we call the time challenge right now. So again, most managers, most of the time have got no time. Based on everything that we found, we would say that about 2/3 of a manager's week is spent in meetings. If you go to managers and ask, is that fun? About a third of that time they would not, maybe not fun is the right question, but about a third of the 2/3 of the week, if you can do the maths, they would say is valuable time, is value added time spent in meetings. So I was spending 2/3 of my week in meetings, and I would argue for most managers, about a third of that is seen as valuable. We did some other research looking at meeting behaviors and meeting statistics, and we found out some fascinating things if you want to take down some of these stats. But we found out that about 70% of managers bring other work to meetings. So if you think they're there for you, then they're probably not. And this was bad enough in the old world of the physical interaction, where people would kind of be on their laptops and they're like, yeah, sorry, yeah, great point, right, whatever. That was in the physical world. In the virtual world, much worse, of course, because I can turn off my screen or turn off my camera, and then while you're there sharing your sort of most heartfelt moments with me about the strategy and the plans for the organization, I'm like, oh my God, so cool. Like Justin Bieber's got new trainers. Oh, what? Drake and Kendrick Lamar are beefing, rap beef. There's new rap beef in the rap business. What? Sorry, was that your vision? You want to do what? 5-year plan? Sorry, what are you talking about? So we know that, most people would say they bring other work to meetings. About 40% of people admitting to falling asleep in meetings. So we thought that was a hilarious statistic and worrying at the same time. Not great. And about half the people who attend meetings just say it was a total waste of time. So when you think about this, meetings occupy a tremendous amount of our week at work. And if you look at what frustrates the hell out of people in the organization, again, one of those things is, look at it the other way. Look at it this way. And this is a question that I love to ask because I've experienced it and it's totally true. Have you ever had a good night out in bad shoes? I suspect you've never had a great night out in bad shoes. You could be in the most beautiful place in the world. If you've got bad shoes, it's going to be a lousy experience. I experienced this. I was in Geneva, beautiful place, middle of summer, gorgeous. And I made the big mistake of taking brand new shoes and wearing them to walk around Geneva with my family. I didn't like it for a little while until I found a sports shop and bought some more comfortable trainers to wear, right? But the point is, you've never had a great night out or a great day out in bad shoes, because when there's something that has a little bit of pain to it, it just ruins the whole experience. If you think about this in the context of meetings, we spend a tremendous amount of our week in meetings, and it's one of those things that irks people quite a lot. So I guess the question is, how do we change it? How do we look at that? For many people, depending on your seniority in organizations, it can be career suicide to say, you know what, I'm not coming to this meeting anymore. It's a total waste of my time. It's taking up 2 hours of my day and I don't need to be there, and therefore I'm not going to be there. You may be lucky enough that you've got a culture in place where that's doable, or you may have a line manager relationship or someone more senior where you can do that. For many people, they might feel that it's not possible. So again, as a manager, it's probably incumbent on us to make sure that we're checking, is this a valuable use of your time? And it helps people. So if you are a senior manager and you've got managers locked up in these meetings and these regular committee sessions and steering groups and feedback sessions and all the other things we get involved in, might be worth rechecking and saying, actually, how could we free up some time? The challenge is, and the challenge that I'll set you is, how do you identify 10% of your week that you could spend doing something in a different way? So it might be half a day, or if you're really ambitious, I would say 20% a day a week, that you should spend between 10 to 20% of your week and doing nothing else in that time other than thinking about how you can redeploy that time into something tremendously value adding. Right? We've all seen the famous stories of Google and the innovations that came out from that time, that they enabled people to do other things that weren't the day job. I think most human beings would accept that we cannot be productive 100% of the week. And we probably also accept that the brain really enjoys novelty. We like doing new things. If, of course, the new things are related to furthering the quests and the goals of the organization, then why not? Why not try and create some space to do something a little bit different that might be value adding to your career, to the prospects of the team, to the sales numbers, to the customer feedback scores, to the customer experience, to the employee experience, to understanding your competitive marketplace. All of these things are really important things to invest our time in, but we often don't get time because we don't have time. So one of the challenges, of course, is time. We feel constrained. We're not able to move or maneuver, and therefore it feels like it would be easier to go somewhere else because I'd have the freedom to do what I need to do in that organization. I feel constrained. I feel like I'm held back here. One of the insights I've had, so I lecture a couple of different business schools, but one of them I've done a number of lectures in London and also with them in the Middle East for the MBA program. And this was fascinating to me. So most of the people who I met with who were studying MBA wanted to leave the organizations they worked for, which is quite interesting because most of the CEOs I know would say that it would be a good thing to offer top talent, the senior people, an opportunity to go and study an MBA. It's a tremendous investment into the individual. But most of those individuals I met studying MBAs want to leave the organizations. Why do they want to leave the companies? Even though those companies have made a tremendous investment in them, they want to leave because they feel constrained. They don't feel that they've got any time to focus on what they would like to focus on. They come to an MBA program and meet all of these amazing, great minds from around the world, and it starts to spark their entrepreneurial sort of juices, in a way, get flowing as a result of those conversations. And of course, all of those things are possible inside the organization, but you feel like it's not possible because I just don't have the space to work on those things that I would love to focus on. Of course, you're never going to get the chance to do that unless you create the space and time to do it. So again, you take the extreme example, love him or hate him, like an Elon Musk. Still has the same 24 hours in the day that we have, but seems to be much more effective than most human beings at utilizing that time. You can't solve the time problem in the present, but you probably can solve it in the future. What do I mean? So your diary, I would imagine in, let's say, May or June probably is stacked because you're busy. Your diary, I would imagine in September, October, probably, if you look at it right now, would look less busy than it does in June. So diarize out 10 to 20% of your week starting on September or October the 1st, and keep that time sacrosanct as if you were going to the gym or a doctor's appointment or dentist or something where you non-negotiable. I'm going to have to spend that time. Then the $1 million question, of course, is how do you redeploy that time, and how do you spend that time on something that's tremendously value adding? So again, that's something to work on. Maybe we can cover that in a future live stream. But I think this is a really important area of identifying that space and that time. And again, if you are in a senior manager position, if you're in a CEO position, thinking to yourself, all right, how can I make sure that I can take the management population and ensure that we can get them to spend 10% of their time on doing something which is value adding for the organization? A tremendous use of that time of 10%, of half a day a week, or even 2 hours a week, would be spent in some sort of considered debate, some critical thinking moment of analysis about what the strategy is, or what the competitors are up to, or what's happening in our marketplace, or what trends are shaping the world that we're in, or what's happening with AI, or what's happening in regulatory space. I mean, these are some fundamentally deeply important questions to ask ourselves as managers, but we probably don't get the time to sit and debate some of those things. It would be weird. I would be weird if I said to a colleague, hey, Mary, fancy going out and getting a sandwich and talking about our competitive landscape and what that means for us as an organization? No, thanks, Wayne. Oh, okay, Mary. Cool. This is like such a fundamentally important way to spend most of your week, as you would do if you were the CEO. But most managers wouldn't do it because it wouldn't occur to us, not because we're thick or we don't have the critical thinking ability, but because we just don't have any time. So time is a huge one. And if we feel like we're running out of it or we're constrained, then it feels like this problem will get solved by going elsewhere. And I guarantee it probably never will, unless you're working for the type of culture, type of organization which values time and looks at it in the way that I guess I've been discussing here. And then the final one, the big one, really big one, I mean, they're all big, they're all mega, is looking at what we would call the 81% number, which absolutely blew me away. I'll let you digest this for a moment while I take a sip of water because I need it. But if you think about this, 81%, we found in our stats that 81% of managers believe that the products or services of the organization could be better. Think about the number. 81% of managers, based on what we found out, believe that the products or services of the organization could be better. I mean, this is a compelling statistic for all sorts of reasons, partly because we spent years looking at and analyzing staff feedback and employee engagement surveys, right? There's a whole range of questions that we ask that are tremendously valid, but we've also found out that according to what we've seen, 81% of the manager population believe that the products or services of the organization could be better. Who's listening to this type of manager feedback? Actually, not really many people, probably not anyone actually in a large complex organization. And this is a real challenge. And the reason why, if we look at this again in the context of keeping great people, especially looking at the manager community, we know that managers are tremendously frustrated because they've got very strong opinions purely because they are evidence-based, market-tested opinions based on observation of seeing how the operation works, which says, I think we could do this better. I think we could do this in a much more efficient way. There's a slicker process here to be had. We're wasting money over here. Why are we doing these things this way when it could be done another way, which we can prove would be more effective? There are all sorts of innovations locked up in the collective mind of the manager community. And this is, again, one of the deep sources of frustration that many people face and believe it will be better in other organizations. Again, this could be one of the compelling reasons why people would be compelled to leave the organization. And again, if we're thinking about the Berber Kafaka, if we're thinking about building a robust business case for change, how do we make sure that we can tap into this collective insight that exists? And it really exists because we see it everywhere we go. We've got such strong, compelling data on this to help managers to be able to articulate some of their challenges that they face and the solutions they've identified and use that for the collective good of the organization. I mean, to me, this feels like, I don't know what you think, but to me, this feels like an absolute no-brainer. Why wouldn't you, as an organization, want to benefit from that insight? Instead, what we often do is we bring in outsiders to tell us what the insiders have been telling us for years. You know, it's no surprise. I spent years looking at employee engagement data where you've got a set of quantitative questions and you've got a huge, like a couple of what we would call more qualitative questions. In the qualitative responses, it's where people say this stuff. They say, I could have told you this would never have worked. I don't know why we did XYZ project. I don't know why we partnered with so-and-so. I don't know why we did that project. I could have told you it would have never worked, and here are the reasons why. But often that collective intelligence is never being able to be sort of addressed or I don't know, fed back to the people who really need to know this type of stuff, therefore to make the right decisions on it. So again, when we think about this, 5 big things, when we think about the role of the manager, key, when we think about how do we, let's recap, let's do a quick recap. When we think about the role of the manager, we know 50% of the people leave the organization because they don't feel grown and developed. So if we're building this robust business case for change, then the first point here is to think about how do we then make sure that we can ensure that the manager community do feel grown and developed. If you've got budget and you've got the ability to invest and spend money in this area, awesome. If you don't have budget and you don't have any ability to spend and invest in this area, it also doesn't matter. This cannot be an excuse for not doing it. This is more about being more ingenious, more entrepreneurial, perhaps, about how do you take some of these challenges that face the organization, work with the manager populations to refocus their energy into some of these areas. I mean, I honestly believe this is probably one of the best ways to invest that 10% is to take a specific strategic challenge that the organization faces and work with the manager community to get to work on it. It builds the bench strength of the manager community. It helps you to solve a challenge that the organization has. And the awesome thing about it is that it should cost you nothing. You know, based on what we've seen, this is such an awesome way to address this challenge. So first one is that. Second one is looking at what we would call the goal setting process. And essentially 42%, if you just join the live stream, do not understand what the goals of the organization are. So this is a huge area that we looked at. Number 3 was looking at the preferences. So we know 61% of managers understand the preferences of their team when it comes to their growth and development in the appraisal process. Really low, and we obviously want that higher. Time is one of the most constraining factors for every human being out there, and it's one of the, of course, limited resources that we all have. But we would identify, or we would advise you to identify between 10 to 20% of the week. Keep that time sacrosanct and be able to redeploy that time into something that's tremendously value adding. And then the last point is around 81% of managers believe that the products or services of the organization could be better. Again, which I think is a really compelling statistic, because what it does in a way where the value is. You know, we've got managers who've worked in the organization for long periods of time. We work with one of the banks, and I would say that the tenure in the manager community must be anywhere between, on average, 10 to 20 years. You've got this deep organizational insight. Getting emotional now. You've got this deep organizational insight, which is tried and tested. They care, they want to do the best that they can, they want to contribute, and they develop all of these sorts of great ideas and thoughts, but often there's no mechanism to be able to feed that back to anyone particular in the organization. So again, I would think when we think about this, when we think about these stats, again, what I wanted to do was to provide this robust business case for change, and also to help you think about, if you are focused on building that collective capability of the management community, then these 5 points are in a way essential, because if you think about them in reverse, if we were to address many of these points, I would suspect it would make sure that the culture changes, and you would have a lot less people who would say that they want to leave the organization. So this is a long way, a very long way round of saying, if you want to keep great people, then focus on some of these really specific things. There's lots of academic talk and highfalutin things out here of what you can do to change the culture and all that. I'm not saying any of that's not important, of course it is, but what we're more focused on are some of the practical, tactical things we've seen, not because we've designed them for the sake of it, but because they work. This is based on tried and tested things we've seen in more than 38 countries around the world. So a huge thank you to everyone who's joined the live stream this week. This was a more impromptu one. As I said, it was meant to be in Riyadh, but unfortunately we couldn't host it in Riyadh, so we had to host it when I arrived back in London. Our next live stream is going to be in 2 weeks, and it's going to be hosted live from Amsterdam. Actually, we have a book launch for our book called How to Become a World-Class Manager in partnership with Emir Recruitment, and we're going to be live in Amsterdam in 2 weeks' time. So we look forward to seeing you, hopefully, live from Amsterdam in a couple of weeks. Thanks so much for joining. See you soon.